Hey everyone, welcome to the video. This one we're going over my favorite value plays for week 15 of the NFL season on Draftkings. I said on Wednesday when I dropped my core plays video that I would do an extra video this week on Friday because I was getting my core plays video out a lot earlier than usual. So I figured I'd be nice and make an extra video. And I was either going to do like GBP stacks or chalk plays or favorite value plays. I set it on value plays because I thought that'd probably be a little bit more valuable to you guys because we need to put value plays in our lineup. It's it's very easy to be able to come on here and say, yeah, I want to play Deshaun Watson, I want to play DeAndre Hopkins, I want to play Travis Kelce. Yeah, everyone knows how to do that. It's pretty easy. But value plays, you got to dig a little bit. I do think I have some pretty good value plays for you guys to help round out your lineups for cash games or GPPs. I got some for both, so we'll go over those. And then before we continue, if you guys could leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out. Really appreciate it. You can also follow me on Twitter at ChrisPennell16. And again, if you're interested in the spreadsheets I build every single week for the NFL season in my Discord chat, you can bug me as much as you want in there. Links found in the description below for my Patreon. And I think that's about it. I got a haircut, so I'm feeling good to go. A good haircut narrative. So let's break down this video. So we're going to start with the quarterback position. I got two quarterbacks I have interest in. And again, these are not my favorite plays on the entire slate. These are my favorite value plays on the slate. So first value quarterback I want to talk about is Kyler Murray here coming at 5,600. And I actually think he's going to be, I think he's actually going to flirt with being one of the highest owned quarterbacks on the slate, just looking at some ownership projections right now. And I get it. He's a little too cheap here at 5,600. He actually does grade out as the top value play on my spreadsheet. This game does feature a 49-point over-under, which is second highest on the entire slate, so it would make sense to want exposure to it, especially a quarterback that's below 6K that has the upside of Kyler Murray. And I also like buying people low. I hate overpaying for people. I will do it sometimes if they're in a really good spot, and like if there's an injury and it just opens up some more room, or usage, I should say. But, Kyler, this is the second cheapest he's been all season. I believe week 2 when he was the 5,600, I think. Let me check. Well, week 2 versus Baltimore, he was 5,400. Then week 1 versus Detroit, he was 5,600. So other than that, this is the cheapest he's been since then. And he's been pretty solid all season besides a few games. I know he's had a rough 2-game stretch here versus the Rams and Pittsburgh, but those are tougher matchups. And then versus San Francisco, which is a tough matchup, 26 points versus Tampa Bay, 30 points versus San Francisco, again, 23 points. New Orleans with a tougher matchup, especially on the road in the Superdome, got 10 points. And then versus the Giants, I don't know what the heck happened versus the Giants. Chase Edmonds kind of stole the show there. He only ended up getting, 6 fantasy points. Really didn't need to do much because they were winning that game. But then 31, 25, 17, 19, 19, 25. Honestly, he's pretty solid, and I think he should have a good game here versus Cleveland, which does hurt me to say because I do got my Browns jacket on. I think you can see it. Yeah. So I'm hoping he doesn't go ballistic to where the Browns don't win the game, but I'm hoping the Browns get a lead here, and Kyler Murray's got to play some catch-up. Now, I don't really expect that to actually happen. It's just this is a Browns fan hopeful thinking. I think this game's going to be pretty close back and forth. Vegas would agree. It's only a 2-point spread, so I think this game's going to be pretty good for fantasy purposes. I prefer Baker, but again, this is a value plays video, and Kyler Murray is just a little bit too cheap here, and he also provides this rushing upside. Now, he hasn't been running a lot this season. If we just look at his game log for the rushing attempts recently, 6 attempts, 2 yards, 4 attempts, 28 yards, 8 attempts for 67 yards. That's not too bad. And he had a 2-game stretch of rushing touchdowns, then 3 attempts for 38, 5 for 34. He's not an absolute menace on the ground this season like Lamar Jackson is. No one's even close to Lamar Jackson. He just broke the rushing record, broke Michael Vick's record. But, he had 3-game stretch where he has 10 rushing attempts, 11 rushing attempts, 10 rushing attempts, 8. He's doing a lot more on the ground than most running backs do. So I do like the upside there. It gives me a little bit of safety. And plus, if he can get a rushing touchdown, that's obviously worth 2 more points than a passing touchdown. So I'll definitely take that. And this is a pretty good matchup on the ground for Kyler Murray if he chooses to take advantage of this. Cleveland is 20th DVOA versus the run, and I also like that they play at a very fast pace. I talk about pace in the NBA every day, but when it comes to the NFL, the Cardinals are playing at a fast pace. About 25 seconds per play, which does lead the league, and I do think there's a lot of upside here for the price, and I do think he's a very solid cash game option. I did not put him on my core plays video, I'm not sure why. I guess he could have been in there. I think he's a pretty solid play this week. I'm not just throwing him on here because he's a cheap guy. I do have a lot of interest in him at 5,600. And, Cleveland's also middle of the road versus the pass, and Arizona actually has one of the better offensive line versus defensive line pass blocking matchups this week, which is pretty surprising, talking about the Arizona Cardinals, one of the pretty draftable offensive line. So they do have a pretty big advantage there according to PFF. So I do think he's a pretty solid play this week. So Kyler Murray, I think you can feel free to load him up. I think he can get 20 points with upside of more on the slate. So don't mind Kyler Murray, and Christian Kirk was a little bit too expensive to include in this video. I just want to say I think he's a decent pairing with Kyler Murray, and then you could run it back with Jarvis Landry if you choose to do so, or you could also go with Baker, Landry, then run it back with Christian Kirk. I think that's totally fine as well. The next game I'm going to talk about, it might make you a little sick, so just compose yourself, sit down, and get ready for what I'm about to say. But I think you could get away with playing Eli Manning here at 5,200. I know it's rough, but if it's a nice price and it's got a great matchup, and if you can stomach it, I say why not? Miami is giving up 23.1 points per game to the quarterback position, which I believe is bottom 5. They're 32nd DVOA versus the pass. The Giants have a 25-point implied team total. That's decent amount of respect for the New York Giants. They're allowing 265 passing yards and 2.38 touchdowns per game. If Eli can just hit that average, I'll be happy. I mean, if you're going to give me 250 plus, 2 to 3 touchdowns from someone that's 5,200, I will take that all day. And honestly, this might be his last home game in New York forever. So he might just have some extra juice here and want to show out for the home fans, which he's been their quarterback for forever. So maybe there's a little bit of added extra motivation. You can't quantify that, but it's a definite possibility of it being his last home game in MetLife. So Eli Manning, I think he is a okay, I wouldn't call him a cash play, but an okay GPP cheap quarterback this week. So don't mind Eli Manning there. So we'll move on to the running back position. And there really wasn't a lot of cheap quarterbacks I like. Like I said, I really like that mid 6K range this week with Baker, Ryan Tannehill, and Deshaun Watson. But if you're going to go cheap, I think Kyler Murray's your guy. Then you could really go cheap with Eli Manning. Even David Blau's not the worst option versus Tampa Bay. It's just, I would rather go, I think, 100 less with Eli Manning, I think. But it's also a good matchup for him. But let's get to some of these cheap running backs. And the first guy I want to talk about is another Arizona Cardinal in Kenyan Drake at 5K. I actually think he's a pretty solid play this week. Probably wouldn't do it cash games, but GBPs, I think he's definitely in play. And honestly, you could play him with Kyler Murray as well because he's very involved in the passing game. If you look at his recent game log being on the Cardinals since week 9, he had 3 targets, 5 targets, 7 targets, 7 targets, 4 targets. That's pretty good. That's over 20 targets the past, 5 weeks. So I like his involvement in the passing game, and the guy's pretty good. He's the most talented running back on this roster right now. David Johnson is dust at this point. I really just want some exposure to this game. Like I said, 49-point over-under, which is second highest on the slate. It's also one of the late games. It starts at 4:05. I don't know about you guys, but I like getting exposure to late games because last week I had all my guys starting at 1 o'clock, and I just knew going in. I'm like, well, I'm going to lose all my money anyway because I hate not having guys that start at 4 o'clock because I feel like I had to be like first in all my contests to even have a chance of cashing. That's just how I feel. So I like getting late game exposure. I mean, there's no like actual math saying if you play late game guys over first 1 p.m. guys, you're going to win more, but that's just how I feel, and I'd rather feel good about it. I mean, this is a really good matchup on the ground here. I already said about Kyler Murray, but this pertains more to Kenyan Drake than would Kyler Murray. Cleveland's 25th DVA versus the run. And they're only giving up 23 points per game to running backs, which isn't bad, but it's still serviceable, and Kenyan Drake's a pretty good running back. We've seen running backs do pretty well versus Cleveland. We saw Joe Mixon have a really good game. Even Benny Snell had a pretty good game. Devin Singletary had a solid game. So running backs are running on Cleveland. They're not the best run defense in the world, even though they're not getting up a ton of points per game to the position. And Cleveland also has the 7th worst rush defensive grade on PFF right now, so the bottom 10 in that category. And he's been mostly playing 80+% of the snaps, although that did dip to 65% last week. David Johnson was involved and Chase Edmonds, but he's still the main back here, and he's the most talented running back. Like I said, DJ just looks old and slow. He's not old, but he looks slow. And Chase Edmonds isn't bad, but he's the third stringer, or second and third stringer. So Kenyan Drake, I think he's a pretty solid play here. You got receiving upside. He should flirt with 20 touches here versus a Cleveland defense that's not been very good versus the run this season, and second highest over-under on the slate. Kenyan Drake, I think he's a pretty solid GPP play this week. Probably not someone I'm looking for in cash games, but honestly, if you had 5K left in your cash lineup and you want to plug in Kenyan Drake, I don't think that's the worst play in the world this week. So do like Kenyan Drake. And then 2 spots above him, I like Raheem Mostert here at 5,200. Colonel Mustard. So he's earned the starting role in what is a very lucrative role as the lead back for a Shanahan-led offense that runs more than anyone in the NFL, about running about 55% of the time right now. And I'm just going to read you guys a quote of what Kyle Shanahan said. So, quote, Raheem's earned it over the last few weeks. We keep trying to balance it out, but what Raheem has done these last few weeks and has continued to do so, we need to give him more opportunities. He's given us no choice. So sounds like he's going to be maybe not necessarily a bell cow running back, but he's going to get the most touches. And the guy looks good. Whenever you watch him play, he just looks pretty good. He looks explosive. He hits the hole hard, and he looks like a pretty good running back. And he's got a very nice average yards per carry. I mean, just last 3 games, I know it's not the biggest sample size, but 6.9, 7.7, 7.5, and he's got 3 straight touchdowns. He also will catch passes as well. He has 4 touchdowns total in the past 3 games. And that was a tough matchup versus New Orleans too. Did well. Baltimore, they're a little bit softer on the ground, but he had a huge game versus Baltimore. It was raining though, but still, Raheem Mostert's been pretty good. And the thing I love here the most is that they are 10.5-point favorites at home with a 29-point team total. That's a perfect setup for running backs. I always tell you guys every single week, I love huge home favorite running backs. And Raheem Mostert now announced the starting running back for this team. You got to like him here at 5,200. I think he's a very solid play. You could play him in cash games too. I have no problem with that. 74 and 60% of the snaps the last 2 weeks. So Raheem Mostert, I think he's a very solid play this week at 5,200. Someone that's definitely on my radar. And then going up a little bit at 5,600. Technically not a value play, but I'm going to break my own rules here a little bit because, well, I can do what I want on this channel. So Phillip Lindsay, I don't love him because it's a complete timeshare, and he does split snaps with Freeman, but this is such a juicy matchup. Kansas City is allowing 31.9 points per game to running backs, which is most of the NFL. They're 30th DVA versus the rush, and hold on, it gets worse. They have the worst running defense ranking on PFF right now, so dead last. They are a very, very bad rush defense, and like I say with pass funnel defense, these guys are a run funnel defense. It's hard to throw on the Kansas City Chiefs, but it is very easily to run on these guys, and he's going to get the first crack at touches, and it's not like volume's really been an issue recently. If you look at his past few games, 16 rushing attempts, 2 targets, 17 attempts, 3 targets, 13 attempts, 3 targets, 16 attempts, 2 targets. I would like him to get a little bit more involved in the rushing game, or the running game, the passing game. Just really hasn't been the case. They like to throw the ball to Royce Freeman for some reason. Phillip Lindsay's the much better running back, but if you're going to give me about 20 touches versus Kansas City, you should definitely have some value, especially, Phillip Lindsay's a good player. He's just, I don't know. I don't really like playing the guy because he has good games here and there, but it never feels great playing Phillip Lindsay. But the 10-point dogs on the road, which is also a concern, but really, if the Broncos want any chance to win this game, it's also a divisional game, but if they want any chance to win, they're going to have to establish the run. They're going to need to get Phillip Lindsay going. They're going to want to run the ball, keep the ball out of Patrick Mahomes' hand. So Phillip Lindsay, I do think he's a pretty solid play at 5,600 this week. And then I almost forgot to talk about my guy Patrick Laird here at 4,500. Now, I'm not a big Laird truther like a lot of these guys are on Twitter, but I do think he's a solid play this week at 4,500. Now, it's much easier to pass on the Giants. I will say that. But he's just here out of necessity because he's like the only serviceable running back on this team. If you look the past 2 weeks, he had 10 carries and 15 carries. 2 really tough matchups, though. I will say Philly's one of the best rush defenses in the NFL. The Jets are, I believe, are second DVOA right now. 16 points, 12 points, thanks to his involvement in the passing game. He's had 5 targets each the past 2 weeks. If you're going to give me about 20 opportunities here versus the New York Giants, I will take it. And now they are pretty good versus the run. They are 11th DVOA versus the rush and not allowing too many points per game to the running back position. But if he can somehow fall into the end zone, get me like 6 targets, 5 catches, I'll take it at 4,500. I think he's a pretty decent flex option this week. I'm not totally sure if you have to go all the way down at your flex this week for running back because there's actually a lot of value options that open up a wide receiver this week. But if you do, I don't think Patrick Laird's a very bad play. So someone to keep your eye on. And then we'll head over to the wide receiver position. So let's talk about my guy my guy Mike Williams this week at 4,500. Now I will say I'm getting a little bit down on him because he was limited again on Thursday, but I'm going to assume, like they said, they should follow the same pattern as last week where he was upgraded to full participation on Friday. So I'm going to assume he's good to go, and I like him this week. Now I gotta say, like I said, I'm lowering on him a little bit because I do think there's some better options that opened up that are a little bit cheaper, but I do think he's an excellent GPP play because we know he has big play upside, and I'm not seeing a lot of buzz on the guy, so could go a little bit lower owned. Not really sure if I want to fire him up in cash games because we're going to talk about some cheaper guys that I think might be better plays. But Mike Williams, definitely, I still like him this week, and he's been solid this season. And, he's definitely capable of the big play. He's 11th in air yards this season, has an average depth of target of 14.5, which is pretty darn good. And he also finally caught his first touchdown of the year last week, which after catching 10 last year. So definitely should have some positive regression at the end of the season here, for the final 3 weeks to catch some touchdowns. Hopefully they come in bunches. And that could definitely happen here versus Minnesota. I mean, they're allowing 40.5 points per game to wide receivers, which is 6th most in the NFL, and he should draw some softer coverage with Keenan Allen drawing the most of the attention here. And if you just look at his game log, he's not been elite, but he doesn't have to at his price tag. 14 points, 19, 9, 7, 17, 9, 8, 12, 13, 7, 11, 4, which is his worst game, week 1. I think Mike Williams should be fine here. I think he gets you 10-plus points, and if he can hook up on a long touchdown, I think you're looking at a 20-point upside here. I mean, he's hitting on the long ball most weeks, 44 for longest catch, 44, 52, 50, 45, 56, not too bad. So Mike Williams, definitely on my radar. He's a little bit cheap here, so definitely someone that's I have interest in as of right now. Then here, I'm going to talk about two of the better plays, I think, that are a little bit cheaper. So Danny Amendola is definitely one. I do think he's going to garner some ownership this week, but deservedly so. So 4,100 here, going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And no Marvin Jones, so it's going to open up some targets on this offense. He's leaving behind 7 targets per game and a 19% target share. And also TJ Hawkinson has gone as well. So Danny Amendola is definitely going to get an uptake in targets, or really just attention from Dave Blau. So the past 2 weeks, Amendola, he had 8 targets for Chicago, caught 3 for 32 yards. Longest catch was 14 yards. Last week versus Minnesota, 8 targets, 5 catches, 34 yards. Longest catch was 10 yards. That's what Danny Amendola is. He's a short to intermediate route guy. He's not going to catch fades all day and bang on the defender. But that makes him a pretty safe cash game play, I think, at this price tag, because this is an amazing matchup versus Tampa Bay. They are a big pass funnel defense. They're allowing 48 points per game to the position, which is most in the NFL. They're first DVA versus the run, and they're allowing the third fewest points per game to the running back position, and their running game sucks anyway. Bo Scarborough is their starting running back, so it makes much more sense to pass on these guys. And they are, I believe, 19th DVA versus the pass, and again, allowing the most points per game to the wide receiver position. Now, his receptions won't turn into big yardage, but he's a pretty good play on a point per reception site like Draftkings, so that's why I'm liking him this week. He's dirt cheap. He should be fine. I think he can get you double-digit points. We have a 47.5 point over-under, and there are dogs, so I think Danny Amendola is a very solid play this week. I would expect him to have some ownership as well, so do like Danny Amendola. One guy, so I'm going to get a little bit out of order here. I probably should have talked about him first because I like to go by salary, but we'll talk about it anyway. So Darius Slay at 4,700. I think he's a fine GPP option. So I actually whiffed hard on him on the showdown slate. I said I'm probably not going to play Darius Slay because I thought Eli Manning would throw these short to intermediate routes to Golden Tate all day. It didn't happen. I was wrong about that for sure. Slayton, he had 8 targets last game versus Philly, 5 catches. It was a great matchup, 154 yards, caught a 55-yard pass, 2 touchdowns, 35 fantasy points. Pretty much broke that showdown slate. So apparently Eli Manning does not mind taking some shots to Slayton. So if I like Eli Manning, I had to like one of his wide receivers. So that's why I wanted to talk about Darius Slayton. And this is a great matchup. Miami is 32nd DVA versus the pass. Again, like he's a cheap pairing with Eli if you feel comfortable losing all your money this week with Darius Slayton and Eli Manning. I don't know if I want to. It definitely has upside, but not someone I really want to go out of my way to do. But if you're making multiple lineups, don't mind a GPP stack of Darius Slayton, Eli Manning. You can run it back with Allen Hurns. Speaking of Allen Hurns, I should probably talk about him. So Devante Parker, let me make sure there wasn't an update while I started recording. So I believe he's 6,400. Let's see if there's any news. So he's listed as questionable. He put in a full practice today, which is good. So if he's in, you could go with the Devante Parker, Eli Manning, Darius Slayton GPP stack. That might be fun. But if Parker is out, you could fire up Allen Hurns, who might not be the worst option. Last week he had 8 targets, 5 catches, 11 points. That's pretty respectable. So again, if Devante Parker's out, you could look Allen Hurns' way. But again, I have no idea as of right now if he's going to play or not. It's a concussion, so totally up in the air. But one of my favorite plays of the week now. So I already liked him before DJ Chark got ruled out, but DJ Chark is now out. So I think Chris Conley becomes probably the best option for your point per dollar wide receiver this week for these cheap guys. 3,600, near the minimum. And Chark is out, which is the big thing. And he played 84% of the snaps last week. Only had 3 targets for 1 catch for 7 yards, which sucked, but that was his worst game in a while. So being on the field is never an issue. And it's definitely not going to be an issue here with DJ Chark being out. DD's going to man the slot, but Conley should feast on the outside here. It's a great matchup versus Oakland. They're bottom half in the league versus wide receivers for points given up. 31st DVA versus the pass. I think Chris Conley is an excellent play here. The guy's got big play upside, versus the Jets. 23 points, 13. couple of these games are a little lackluster, but 21 versus Kansas City, I like Chris Conley here quite a bit. So definitely someone I'm looking to lock in my lineup, especially for cash games. He's probably going to be one of the highest wide receivers of the week, especially with no DJ Chark. So Chris Conley, fire him up with confidence. One of my favorite plays this week as of right now. And then if you want to, you can look at these Eagles wide receivers. Aguilar is looking like he's going to be ruled out. There's no Alshon Jeffrey. They are a complete mess. So Greg Ward, I believe he's 3K. He's the bare minimum. So if you want to fire him up, you totally could. He played 87% of the snaps last week, had 9 targets, 4 catches, 7.4 points. You can play Greg Ward this week. It might not feel good playing Greg Ward, but they're a mess. They have J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, and they have I forget the other guy's name. I believe he's min price as well, but I think they just put him up off the practice squad. So, but out of anybody, I like Greg Ward here. 9 targets last week was encouraging. Should see 90% of the snaps this week. I mean, they're just running out of bodies. So Greg Ward, not a bad option if you want to go all the way down. There's a lot of value wide receiver this week, so I definitely think you could spend up at running back if you want to, or quarterback. But let's move on to the tight end position. So I like Zach Ertz a lot this week. That's my spend up guy, just because they're missing so many bodies, like I just said. I mean, if you had to choose between throwing to Greg Ward, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, and a practice squad guy, or Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz, personally, if I'm Carson Wentz, I'm picking Zach Ertz. It wouldn't surprise me if Zach Ertz has 15 plus targets in this game. So I do like him for sure if you can spend up. But this is a value play video, so we're going to talk about some cheap guys. And my favorite one right now is Tyler Higbee at 3,900. So it's looking like Gerald Everett will be out. He is yet to practice. So last report I read was that he is trending towards not playing. So under that assumption, I think we can fire Tyler Higbee up as one of the best plays at tight end this week. And I mean, his price still really isn't caught up to what he's been doing the past 2 weeks. He had 26 points versus Arizona, then 21 points versus Seattle, 19 targets the past 2 weeks, 14 receptions. I will say he's had the 2 best matchups possible you can ask for a tight end. Arizona's giving the most points per game to the position. Seattle, the second most. Seattle's giving up 16 points per game. Arizona, about 21 points per game. So that might have helped a little bit, but this isn't a bad matchup versus Dallas either. They're allowing the 11th most points per game to the position, and the guy's just been pretty good. So Tyler Higbee at 3,900, I would say he's a core play for me. Now, I'm talking about a lot of value guys, so I don't think you have to go cheap at every single position this week. So pick and choose where you want to go value at, but I typically like to spend down at tight end. Zach Ertz is pretty enticing considering all of the missing bodies for the Philadelphia Eagles, but Tyler Higbee is my first cheap option as of right now. And then the next guy I like is Ian Thomas at 3,100. Let me see if they updated Greg Olsen yet, because the last thing I read was he hasn't cleared concussion protocol yet. Now, I've heard there's a decent chance he does end up playing, so we'll have to see, but let me see the recent report. So, he just got ruled out. So, wait, yeah, December 13th. Okay, so he did get ruled out, so there we go. Ian Thomas, we can fire him up. That makes feel a lot better. So, yeah, we can fire up Ian Thomas. I think he's right up there with Tyler Higbee as being the best play. I'd actually probably rather save some salary with Ian Thomas here at 3,100. So, yeah, what I said about Tyler Higbee, I'd rather play Ian Thomas than Tyler Higbee as of right now because he's a little bit cheaper, and we'll talk about the matchup. So, good. I'm happy. We can play Ian Thomas. I think he's an excellent play this week. I'm glad I checked the Greg Olsen news. So, he is out. And, again, he should be an excellent play here. I like Thomas as a player. He's good. He's athletic, and he plays very well with Kyle Allen. We've seen it 2 games now. Last year, he had a really good game with Kyle Allen. Last week versus Atlanta, 10 targets, 5 catches, 16.7 fantasy points. Price didn't really rise much. Guy's just a pretty good tight end, and he's dirt cheap facing Seattle, who's the light version of Arizona. I already talked about how Tyler Higbee feasted on Seattle. Well, I think Ian Thomas can do the same thing here. They're allowing 16.8 points per game to tight ends, which is second most in the NFL. So Ian Thomas, I think, actually a pretty solid play. I'm glad I read the Greg Olsen news, so you could definitely fire him up with confidence. Probably a better point per dollar option than Tyler Higbee, but I like those two quite a bit. So definitely can fire both up. Now, I haven't really dug too deep into defenses because, I mean, it's defense. You really can't project a defense. Obviously, yeah, the Patriots probably going to have a good game versus Cincinnati, but I don't really spend up for defense. So let me see. Value options, just out the top of my head, looking at I like the Packers. I said that earlier in the week. One of the lower Vegas totals. They're playing at home versus Mitch Trubisky, who can turn into trash cans. He can also turn into a pretty decent quarterback, but more than likely he turns into a garbage can. So I like the Packers defense. I think the Eagles defense is solid versus Dwayne Haskins. Chiefs defense isn't bad at home versus Denver, but again, they're not really that cheap. There's not a lot of cheap defenses this week. I will say that. I don't like the Panthers really that much. Jaguars probably have to pass there. Bears, I don't really trust playing a defense versus Aaron Rodgers, although we've seen them not have very good games before, but I really don't want to play defense in Lambeau. Chargers versus Minnesota. I mean, they grade out well as a point per dollar option, but it's pretty hard to trust. I can see Dalvin Cook and them feasting on the ground versus them. So yeah, I'm probably going to have to go 3K and above this week at defense. We'll see. I mean, it just depends, but we'll see. I'll probably play the ownership game at defense and just see what fits. But anyway, guys, I hope this video was helpful. If it was, remember to leave a like. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. Really appreciate it. Also follow me on Twitter at ChrisPinto16, and spreadsheets are available in the link in the description below for my Discord. And see you guys in the next video, and we'll do the lineup building then.